Okay.
So we're good.
Okay, doke. I think the first couple of things on the agenda would be, of course, approval of the minutes. And then number 4, as it's listed, is review of items from last meeting. If your permission, what I'd like to do is combine those a little bit. I think the most important thing from the last meeting in December was that our goal was to bring to your attention some of the reality of getting plans approved by the township, given their present regulations and modified regulations. We weren't sure how many people on our committee understood the process, understood what laws we need to go by at the moment and how they affect, let's say, present applications for a zoning permit, whether it be a land development or just a permit that's approved by the township. It was a very aggressive meeting. I thought that we accomplished some of what we wanted to do, and that is a lot of people don't realize what regulates this process. We go through it every day as architects with clients, and a lot of them really don't, because they have other things that they're doing in their lives. And to study the zoning regulations, quite frankly, is probably not done until they actually have a project that they're trying to put forth through the townships. So it was important that we, with our committee, enlighten you on, and that was done by Todd and Mark, some of the reality situations. The meeting minutes are very full of topics that deserve quite a bit more discussion. But we wanted to start out by saying that right now, this is existing, some of the changes have been made, some of the realities of getting permits, so that everyone who read the minutes, at least I thought they were excellent minutes, were very inclusive. So people who didn't attend the meeting hopefully have read those minutes so that we don't go and rehash everything in this meeting, because we need to move forward and try to satisfy our goal of what the township might want to see from us in terms of recommendations and format. So we did acknowledge some takeaways from the meeting, and we will do that at every meeting. I think at the end of the minutes at the last meeting, Amy has a whole section on the takeaways for tonight's meeting. I think what I would like to suggest, with your permission, is that we spend a little bit of time with any kind of outstanding questions that came up because you read the minutes. I would like to suggest that if you have questions, and I know you will, please email them to me. And then I can share those with Amy and Mark and Todd, and then we can kind of get more conversation on the bullet points of the items that really stand out from that last meeting in terms of zoning. Tonight we have a little bit of a different program that we're trying to dovetail into what we did at the last meeting. I assume this information will be valuable so that when we go into the next meeting, we'll have another set of takeaways that we can address specifically. So if you have some, let's say, outstanding questions or issues from reading the minutes and listening to the last meeting, why don't we take a little bit of time and go over them? There will be people who did not attend this meeting, and we want to make sure that everyone gets the minutes and understands that the process that we're going through and has a chance to express their opinions. But we don't want to belabor it. We want to move forward. with making recommendations as our eventual goal. So anyone have any, I know, Diane, you had a couple questions I think you asked. Do you want to share those with us?
I'll start with the easy one. I called Amy today because I was kind of in a muddle about making sure I understood. So under the meetings takeaway / next steps, I just wanted to get confirmation as to an understanding of what the conditional use process is. And Amy gave me insight, but maybe others on the committee would want just
Yeah.
a sentence or two about it.
It's a fair question, sure. So who would provide that kind of statement? Do you think that would come from Mark or
Yeah,
possibly
Mark.
Todd?
Mark or Todd can handle that.
Well, I don't know that we've actually ever had a conditional use approval here in the township since I've been here, and that's been 10 years now. So Todd, have you ever dealt with a conditional use approval? Because we only have, I think, 1 or 2 conditional uses altogether
Mark,
in the
can you
township.
just generally explain what a conditional use is and how it's used? We don't use them often in the township at
Yeah.
all. but-
Sure. Yeah. A conditional use is normally going to be a use of property that it is permitted by right, but you have to go through a process where additional conditions can be applied by the township. So I think a lot of times conditional uses are reserved for things that might be considered noxious or have otherwise negative impacts to surrounding properties. And when you go through that process, there's normally going to be a hearing, and there could be the opportunity for the municipality to place additional restrictions on the use. Could be things like hours of operation, noise, lighting, things like that, that might be a concern related to the use itself.
And in the terms of parking, there are some places, not Harris Township, but there are some places in the state that allow you to get some kind of consideration for your parking regulations through the conditional use process. So they may let you have a little bit of a variance on how many parking spaces you have to do, provided you meet other
Right.
qualifications.
And that's the information we really need to layer in eventually, is some of those other ordinances that we could learn from if we feel they're applicable.
Mhm.
Todd, anything to add to that that Mark talked about?
Yeah, I think Mark's correct. I don't know that we even have anything in our ordinance that's addressed by conditional use process now. Maybe we do, and I don't remember it because we've never used it, but we do allow, I think, one use by special exception, and that goes through the zoning hearing board, and that's a totally separate process, but that's not something that we've ever done.
Okay. So Diane, if you want to formally just jot that concern down, and I'll alert everyone through the minutes that, or this recording, that it's been discussed, and we'll move on to. You have any other questions you might want to offer?
I just asked for Amy for clarification, just to make sure I truly understood, why we cannot change the formula for the amount of parking spaces that are in our ordinance. And she explained about the International Traffic Engineers standards that we're, utilizing. And the other question was on the first page of the notes, in talking about Elaine's property. She meets the required amount of lot coverage, but her impervious coverage is too high. So I said to Amy, I asked her, well, does that mean you can just remove a parking space and put it in grass, and then that would be okay? Well, that's not quite right. And I didn't see this, Amy, when we were talking, but I flipped on the next page and it says, in order to change the use, additional parking would be required. So I understand better about
Okay.
that.
Well, that's good. I mean, this is why we're having these meetings and we're reviewing the minutes. because some of this can be answered offline and really
Right.
doesn't hold up.
Exactly.
Okay, appreciate that. How about anyone else? Having read the minutes, anything that stands out that we really need to drill in on in our proceedings and processes? As I said, there is a lot in that set of minutes. And we're eventually going to have to drill down more specifically in some of those areas that you read in your minutes. But anything stand out? Robin, anything?
No,
Barb?
no, I'm fine.
Well, that almost scares me. Cheryl, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Anything you read in the minutes that you want clarification?
Well, not in the minutes. They're pretty straightforward, I think, but as I read through them, and I missed the second meeting, but was at the first meeting, I guess I'm still confused exactly what is our focus? What are we,
Yeah,
What's our-
well, Cheryl, I think I saw in the minutes here, we talked about why are we doing this in the first place and who we are going to address, which of course is the township, and what format they want this recommendations to follow, and then for us to provide them with some suggestions as to areas of study, further study, or actual recommendations that we might make in change of the present ordinances to alleviate some of the problems that we all define here. So that's pretty much, we established that at the very beginning, because my question to the committee guys, why are we here? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? So if that answers your question,
sort of, but do we have a priority of what we want to do, or are we still working on that?
well, I think the priority is to listen to all the information that we can gather from meetings like this, from presentations that the township has done for us, some of the dialogue that we generate through a few meetings, and then to actually try to sit down and craft out a recommendation, which we know will be not complete, but will be an attempt at setting up some bullet points that we think are really essential to include in the report. And then, as every document is, we put it up on the wall and throw darts at it, and then we improve it and we try to
Right, right,
be as inclusive as we can. That will be a challenge for this committee.
right. Okay.
Rebecca, do you have anything? I saw you. Okay,
No, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, those minutes were really clear.
Yeah, they
hold
were.
on. I appreciate that,
Mhm.
Amy. Those were a good set of minutes.
Thanks.
Okay, so the task is to approve the minutes, which is kind of an informality, but I would like to have that motion approved because it sets on record what we heard, what we expect and everything. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll
I'll
second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes of December 14 have been approved and recommended for recording. Based on also the fact that if you have any direct points that you want to communicate, you can communicate by emailing me and copying Amy, or sending it to Amy and copying me, so that we're all in the same loop as to what's going on. Okay, cool. So now we're into the next point of the presentation tonight. And Mark, you were going to take us through an informational step on the small area plan. I believe that the idea was to see how that might synthesize with some of the things that we're talking about in the village district. So I'm not sure, is you and Todd going to lead this presentation or?
Yeah, I have a presentation I prepared that I'll go through the slides. It's fairly brief. Amy, if you can set me up that I can share my screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you the host, so you should be able to share then.
All right. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and then I'll go through this. Again, it's a fairly brief presentation. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Uh-huh.
So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the Boalsburg Small Area Plan that you had a link to in your agenda packet. And I'm going to focus primarily on goals and actions in that plan as they relate back to parking in the village district itself. So I'm not going to go over all of the plan because it's a pretty thick document that covers other areas. So a little bit of background on the plan itself. This was a community-led planning effort that began back in 2013 at the recommendation of the Township's Planning Commission. At that point, they had just finished a review of the township's zoning regulations, and they didn't feel like they had a lot of direction on how zoning should be changed in the area. They recommended that a plan be put together. So what the board did was they appointed a steering committee, and Chuck Rizzio, who's in attendance this evening, was actually the chair of that committee. That was comprised of residents of both the village and the township, as well as business owners and other stakeholders who ultimately, through a process of several years of study, physically wrote the plan themselves. So as staff, we were there to try to help them facilitate the process, and we helped out with graphics and layout of the plan and whatnot. But this really was a citizen-led effort that was aimed at trying to come up with a plan for the Boalsburg area. One of the things the plan did was it built upon previous planning efforts. I think in the last 40 years, there's probably been close to 7 or so studies done about Boalsburg, including the one that was originally done when the village district itself was created. So there's been previous attempts to plan for the village and some of the other areas of the township around it. And this plan then was ultimately adopted by the Board of Supervisors in June of 2016. So the plan's purpose is to provide a long-range vision to help guide future growth and development of the Boalsburg area. The Boalsburg area is more than the village itself, and I'll show a map here in a minute that shows the entire extent of the plan. It's important also to note here that future growth and development also includes planning for what you don't want to have change. I think a lot of times when we talk about planning, people assume that it's that you want a lot of change to occur. It also is about trying to plan for what you want to have stay the same. The study area, as I mentioned, was beyond the village itself. It did include the village district, the surrounding residential areas, the Bull Avenue commercial corridor, as well as the military museum and the Bull Mansion. This plan identifies goals and actions for each of these different areas, which were identified as nodes in the plan. And there's actions with each of these goals that ultimately are help the township achieve the goals if they do the actions. And this plan is generally consistent with the Center Region Comprehensive Plan, which is the township's long-range planning document that guides growth and development for the entire township itself. And ultimately, this small area plan is recommendatory in nature. It's not something that the township has to implement. It is something that the township can choose to implement. So these are recommendations that came from the community.
Good.
So here's a picture, a map of the planning area. As you can see, we have the cultural node here, which included the military museum and the Bull Mansion property, as well as the cemetery and Blue Spring Park. The commercial node that included everything along Bull Avenue, basically from Angelo's Pizza up here to the Church Street, Bull Avenue intersection. And then it included the village, the residential areas around the village, and it also included this large open space parcel that's a farm. It's the Biddle Farm, as well as the Yoder Preserve. So one of the first things that this committee did when they got together. They did what was called a SWOT analysis. They talked about what are the good things about Boalsburg, what are some of the weaknesses, what are some opportunities, what are some threats. And they put together a vision statement. And this vision statement is really intended to be, what would you say if you were to step into the Boalsburg area 20 years from now? What would you be seeing when you arrive? And this is the statement they came up with. So I'm going to read I'll try not to read everything, but I will read this. Boalsburg is a vibrant community which embraces its rich heritage with a strong sense of place and self. By supporting a harmonious mix of business, residential, and cultural offerings, Boalsburg is a desired destination for residents and visitors alike. We will continue to encourage and foster a sustainable and unique community through a diverse, sensitive, and deliberate improvement plan which respects the built environment, including its historic, cultural, and recreational resources. That is the statement that is the overarching kind of vision for all of the goals that are included in the plan itself.
Good.
So what I'm going to talk about next, just a few more slides, and then I'll be done, is the goals related to the village node, and then some of the actions that are included in the plan that relate back to parking. So these were the 4 goals for the village node. The first 3 are probably much more specific to the village, whereas that last one was about that large farm on West Main Street that still has a lot of development potential. So these first 3 goals really are about trying to preserve the character that exists here in the township, in the village itself, promoting adaptive reuse of historic structures, ensuring that anything that is developed in the future is consistent with the form, scale, and character of what's here now, and that the historic character and the commercial core that exists in the village make it a place that people want to be. I think there was a lot of times throughout the discussions amongst the steering committee we talked about sense of place and identity. They didn't want to see that lost. So again, it was, the goals are really related to allowing change to occur, but keeping the things that are most valued by the community that make it unique. So there were a few things within this plan, actions that are parking related. To make it a little easier, I italicized anything that the township has already completed. So for the village node itself, the first action was to reduce the amount of off-street parking required for commercial uses within the village. Existing lot sizes and parking restrictions impede the adaptive reuse of structures for non-residential purposes. I think the idea behind that was in the future, if some of the other actions were completed, there may be opportunities for other parking, which have not been done yet. And I'll get to that on the next slide. The second action was to revise the zoning regulations to allow for additional off-street parking on properties within the village. As we discussed at the last meeting, that occurred back in 2018 when the off-street parking standards were updated and the 4 parking space restriction was lifted. Also consider visual buffering requirements for large parking areas on properties within the village. We have not addressed that yet. So then the next 2 actions specifically related to parking have to do with providing public parking on township-owned parcels, and it specifically calls out the maintenance facility, if it were to move, which it now has moved, that this could be a possible location for off-street parking, and that if it was, there should be signage and other wayfinding information to direct motorists to that off-street parking lot. And then the next action was to work with local churches and the Boalsburg Fire Company to allow for off-street parking at their facilities. I think both of these actions were discussed by the committee over their last 2 meetings. Again, these were recommendations of the plan that haven't been implemented yet, but these were things that the committee had felt should be done to try to improve the parking situation in the village. There were some other actions in the plan that can impact parking. These specific actions are not related directly to parking, but they can have an impact. And both of these were done back in 2021. In 2021, the township adopted updated regulations for the village zoning district. We talked about this a little bit last month. This included revised building lot coverage, where the lot coverage was increased to 35% to allow more flexibility for buildings to be established, but also a reduction in impervious coverage. That was done in part to reduce potential stormwater impacts. It also was done after the Planning Commission had studied to determine that there was actually quite a bit of open space in the village that could theoretically be paved that might have a lot of negative impacts on the character. So these two recommendations were done in 2021. They certainly have an impact on the amount of parking that can be placed on a property. But there's other parts of the plan that, if implemented, might mitigate those impacts. And then the last thing I want to talk about is there was a chapter that was actually plan-wide that dealt with connectivity. These four goals and actions really, I think, highlight another thing that the committee may want to consider, and that is just to ensure that if we're allowing parking to be located off-site, that there's a safe way to get customers to businesses without them having to walk down the middle of the street or in an alleyway where it may not be well lit and safe. So there was some goals and actions in the plan here about trying to improve better connectivity throughout the village, as well as to other parts of the Boalsburg area, outside of the village, to the commercial area out along Bowl Avenue, to the museum properties, and also ensuring that the sidewalks that are in the village are well maintained and they're adequately lit to ensure people can safely walk on them at all times of the day. So I think the last thing I want to just emphasize is that the plan's outcomes, it really comes down to implementation. And with anything, anytime you want to accomplish something big, you need to have a plan. We always, as planners, like to show pictures of barn raisings because I think we can all try to understand that that's a team effort, not, and it requires a plan. You just don't go out there and start sticking pieces of wood together and hope that it works out. Ultimately, implementation is a process. It's not an event. So this plan has a lot of actions that have been implemented, and there's also many that have not been implemented yet. It's an ongoing thing. It has been occurring on a regular basis, primarily through township action. There's a few things in here that might involve other groups, might involve the state, might involve the Bowl Mansion ownership, things like that. But what the municipality can work on has typically been included on the planning commission work program on an annual basis. They've typically had one or so items included on their work program. There's no set order for implementation. Again, some actions are going to be completed earlier and others will remain to be completed. I think a good example is the four parking space restriction in the village was taken out at a time when we were making other edits to off-street parking related to a different part of the township. It just made sense while we were updating these holistic parking regulations to remove something rather than having to go back later and do it again. And there was an immediate benefit where now folks could put more than 4 spaces on their property. Right. And then ultimately, implementation of the plan moves the community closer to the vision that was identified. So every time the township kind of checks these boxes off, it's getting closer to meeting the goals of the plan, which ultimately help fulfill the vision that the steering committee identified. So that's kind of how the plan has been implemented. It's typically how most plans are implemented. It's a piecemeal process that ultimately, in the end, you hopefully will have what you intended to have when you set out with your vision for the community. So that is my presentation on the plan. I didn't go into the other section for the cultural or the commercial areas because they're not directly related to what we're talking about, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about what I presented or anything else in the plan for that matter. If anyone has any, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, so why don't we go around if there are any direct questions? I know I have a couple. Committee members, any, by the way, that was an excellent overview. I think that for me, that was encouraging to hear how far you've gone, what you've been thinking about, you and the town. I think it's very mature and it's really an interesting study that I think is exciting to see how we can implement it. So the question would become, number one, committee members, any specific questions about Mark, what his presentation was and what the plan involves?
Yes. The official map. Amy has put together a committee that's, am I correct, Amy, on the official map? And I'm wondering, do you see these things, Mark, dovetailing with the official map, especially in the connectivity portion of it?
Yeah, I think theoretically, we haven't met yet with the official map committee. But the official map, for those of you who may not be aware, is a different planning document that the township can adopt. And what it is, it's a township-wide map where the municipality can identify either lands or improvements that they want to make in the future and reserve those lands should someone come in to develop. So if the township knows they want to put a road from one point to another, they can show it on this map. And then if a developer were to come in and propose a development, the township can say, hey, we have a facility we want to have in this area. We'd like you to either do it or we can, negotiate to buy the land or what have you. So certainly some of the official map could dovetail with some of the parking recommendations, sidewalks, trails, connectivity.
Right.
Also identifying potential lands that could be parking lots within the village area. Those
Well,
can
I'm
be shown
just-
as well.
I'm just
Municipal
thinking
lots.
of, I think we've targeted, we know that around the township building, there's going to be parking spaces available. But do we have safe transportation, safe pathways for people to get from there to,
Well, I think that's what we have to study. I mean, that's an individual point A to point B, and that may be some of our recommendations, that we find that some of these connectivity trails are not desirable and that we would recommend upgrading. That
So
would be
can-
an honest recommendation from our committee.
so
I think
can we put
Mark
that on our
Peterson-
agenda? That we would like as one of our outcomes to possibly have, some directions for for that next step. Because that next step will be more of the official map.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, Mark, it might be nice if each of us have an 11 by 17 handout on that map that we can keep in our folders so that we can always reference it, knowing that what type of document it is, but it gives us an overview as a committee of some of these things that we need to look at. So might be helpful for each member to have a document like that.
Bob, Frank Harden has his hand up.
Yeah, I didn't see Frank. Where is he?
He's hiding in the corner.
Oh, he's hiding from us. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment on the sidewalks and everything. I think if you'll noticed around the village, the last, I don't know how many years, 4 or 5, whatever, we've been working on sidewalks. Every year we're doing another section and trying to get them all back up to snuff and done. I don't know exactly where we're at. Amy, how many more years do we have to go to finish that?
Funny you should bring that up. The township engineer and I are going to sit down this spring and put together a long range plan to see. There's still some sections on West Main that are pretty bad that we need to take care of. So that'll happen over this year and the next coming years. But we're going to try to get an end game. So we're not actually working on the village sidewalks until the end of time itself, which is what this feels like because we started this project probably in 2016 or 17. So it was much needed. So it's been a good project for us to have.
And you're also addressing accessibility, I assume.
Yeah, we've been looking at places where, because our sidewalks are so old, we were trying to address places where we didn't have any accessibility and making sure we were making those connections. And also we have tons of trees that like to heave up all the sidewalks. So we've been working on that too.
Yep. And downspouts that overhang the sidewalk to go down the tree.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? This is good.
Yeah.
Yes, Barb. Barb, you're muted.
Unmute.
Sorry about that. That doesn't,
There you
I don't mute very often, so sorry about that. The small business plan, I thought it was an exceptional plan. I was very impressed with it. Since it was developed in 2016, do we still consider this our working document for activities going on within the community?
I think that it's still unless the board feels otherwise, and that we've still been getting direction from them to move forward with implementing it.
Okay,
I don't know that there's been a lot of changes in the area that would make any of these recommendations no longer applicable. I think if there
Uh-huh.
are, though, certainly that'd be something that the committee could always point out if you feel there's something in there that is no longer consistent with, development in Boalsburg area in general.
well, I thought there were some really remarkable plans that have been identified. But is there a priority list of some of those initiatives and how they should be implemented?
So the priority had been first, we worked on the village, the commercial corridor along Bowl Avenue. We
Uh-huh.
actually, the planning commission worked on drafting an entirely new zoning district for that. It was adopted a couple years ago because all the properties out there essentially couldn't be redeveloped. So that was one of the top priorities. And then we were also directed to start working in the village to update the zoning as part of a residential review that we were working on anyway. So I don't know that we've received any other direction or any further prioritization. That might be something the board might want to do
Okay,
when they meet
yeah.
with the planning commission, again, to work on their work program.
Yeah, because a lot of those are going to relate back to the parking issue.
Yeah,
Well, one of the things to keep in mind, and again, we don't have like a priority list, but for example, the one thing, if you'll look in the business district or commercial district, the road diet for 322. Well, we're working on that with PennDOT. So the next time they repave, hopefully we can iron that all out and come up with something that everybody's agreeable to. So it's not that this is more of our guidebook than our walking instructions or
Okay,
marching instructions, I guess is a better way. But anything that we do, we refer to this as kind of where we want to go with a project.
good. Okay, thank you.
thank you, Barb. Anyone else? Randy, any thoughts? The moment?
Sedalia has her hand up, Bob.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Line of people at the top, so I'm not sure if you saw me or not, but yeah, I apologize. I was having some technical problems, so I missed a good part of the presentation, but it looked really interesting. The one question that just came to my mind was in terms of the design aspect of it, has universal design been part of that process in terms of looking at people who have different abilities, mobile abilities, if they're on wheelchair or motor chairs, if and there's they still like to walk around Boalsburg and still see a lot of the shops and the different nature areas. Has it been part of that process?
I think Amy might want to, I can take a little stab at it, but I think your plan for sidewalks covers some of that, right?
Yeah, we're required as a municipality that we have to provide accessibility. That's something that we have to look at whenever we do any kind of connectivity project. So one of the goals of the Boalsburg Village Sidewalk Project was, number one, to deal with the fact that a lot of those sidewalks were heaving up and they were making it difficult for anybody to walk on them, but also to deal with that universal connectivity piece so that folks could have safe landings when they do cross the streets. We did down by the post office, we did put in on Pine Street the accessible pads so that when people cross the street, they have the accessibility there, because that was something that's been lacking.
I think you have to be careful on accessibility. What Amy's talking about is the circulation fabric of the town, sidewalks, curbs, heaving sidewalks, those type of things. But when it comes to a building, that's a different story. We have buildings that go up steps, quite a number of them, porches and steps, either interior or exterior. And so the only way that those will get changed is if there's improvements made to the building, and the building has to meet the present accessibility requirements. So it goes back on the property owner at that point to make those revisions.
And then following, just to dovetail that question, is wayfinding if there's any signage in terms of that's going to be part of that process.
So, Sedalia, we haven't talked about wayfinding signage within the village. One of the things our Parks and Rec Committee is very interested in doing is doing wayfinding signage between our parks. So having those directional signs, Yoder Preserve, Blue Spring Park, certainly two that are in the village, directing folks to other areas. But we haven't discussed the wayfinding signage for just the village itself. That's something I worked in Elizabethtown, Lancaster County, and we established municipal parking lots, and we color coded them by M&M colors because M&M Mars is Mars plant is located there. So I think they did some great wayfinding signage for like the red M&M lot or the green M&M lot or whatever. So that might be something we want to think about as we look at ideas for this toolkit that we're going to put together on the parking.
And then the last question I have is in terms of, is there a way to do specific process where you're looking at just human geography, just like the movement, different patterns throughout the day or different patterns throughout the month or events? I'm sure you guys are already doing that, but is that part of the process too, and how people are kind of coming through, identifying different ways that people are coming through the village and such?
That's not something that we've looked at as part of the connectivity, the sidewalk plan. That is something that typically we only look at on the traffic side of things, the car side of things, the vehicle side of things, but we haven't considered that as part of the connectivity side of things.
It's been a neat evolution in Ballsburg that I've observed. Main Street used to be the main form of connectivity for larger parts of the state. And then they built 322. And that took some of the pressure off of Main Street. Then they built the bypass. So now we have the third road that has taken pressure off of the village district, but also want to make sure that we have a calm environment that people can be more pedestrian and walk around. So it's been a kind of a good thing in a way that some of the speedier traffic that wants to go blowing down the road is outside of our village district. And that's helped the architecture and the businesses. At least we're hoping that it'll encourage more business downtown. Interesting thing that's happened over 100 years or more. Okay, anyone else here with some pointed questions about what Mark had presented? I have one, and that is because I don't understand what your opinions would be. How do we synthesize what we heard, what we saw, as a form of information that we can then kind of check off how we want to make recommendations to the township? Do we have this report in front of us so that we bring it up and we talk about each of the items? How do you feel we want to integrate what we've heard into our recommendations? That's a question that I'm not sure I can answer. Well, they take the oxygen out of the room. My concern is that we have this valuable information. How do we keep it in our minds so that when we start to drill in on our recommendations to the township, that we've included those things that we feel are really critical in that report so that we can offer those to the township? Do we keep a copy of it in each one's packet, or how do we organize? Do we do a charrette and we put everything up on the wall and say, yes, this is critical and this isn't? Or does anyone have any ideas of how we might want to integrate this?
So just a suggestion, we could put together a document for you that has the list of all the recommendations in the small area plan. And then at one of your future meetings, I like the idea of let's put, pieces of paper up on the board or whatever, and let's have everybody vote. Like, we think this because as Barb pointed out, the plan was done 6 years ago. So let's take a look at it and say, yep, we still think this is a worthy goal, or The shared parking thing I always go back to because we always talk about it, but we've never actually talked to the churches or the fire company. So we may
Yes.
find that that has to come out after we talk to them, and maybe they're not interested. You know what I mean? So maybe we'll put that document together for you so you can have it, for next month. But then in a future meeting, we actually you guys go through and vote
I
on
think-
those items.
I, for one, think that's an excellent idea because we want to use this information and we want to pick out what we're feeling are the high priorities of what we're trying to accomplish. And to have it in front of us, it's not on a screen on a computer and we're not looking at it. We're actually doing a workshop where we, as you say, discuss them, kind of get a general feeling of how everyone feels. Is it worth giving to the township? Yes, no. Then we move on to the next. So it's a kind of a way to work through the process. So we're going to have a good workshop on a Saturday morning with all
As
kinds of
long-
desserts and
As long as it's just it's just a step towards the goal. I mean, I think we have a lot of other things, data and information to collect. As Amy brought up, meeting with the fire department and the churches.
churches.
Right. So we're making steps towards, but I don't feel like we've really explored a lot of areas that could be explored. So
Well,
I think you have to believe in the process of what we're doing right now. And that is we're fact finding, we're doing as best we can to gather information. I have to say, young lady, that when I was fire chief back in '85, we were talking about parking at the fire hall. And I can tell you right now, as Robin's husband will agree with me, we never got anywhere.
No.
I think the condition of the fire company is such that they would be open-minded. So I think we need to take advantage of that opportunity and just see what they have to say. And so
Yeah.
maybe however we engage them and perhaps members of the churches, the two churches, would be really desirable to plug into our input.
Mhm.
I don't know how we do it. We invite them to a meeting or
Yeah.
a workshop or something.
I was thinking maybe like your March meeting, you could invite them to come and just focus on that topic with them. So that way you're just focused on that one thing and you could have representatives there.
That would be
Um,
fine.
Supervisor Harden has his hand up.
Okay, that's good.
I always put my hand up. I don't do a one or a two, but I do put my hand up. Now, I want to kind of go on, the question is, where do we proceed on this? The one thing that if you were at our last meeting, when the supervisors have heard enough on a topic, we get pretty short and let's move on. So if you were at our last meeting, you saw an example of that. But what I would envision with this small area business plan, what I would envision is that you would take something out of here. For example, what we were just talking about, parking at the churches now. And in your report to the supervisor, say, this is a priority. We want this moved up in the priority on the small area
Sure.
business plan, that these would go here. So we've already done a lot of work there. And like you said, the fire company's been doing it for 30 years or whatever. So I would say those things, you just say, hey, we need to move that up on the priority. The things that I think are more what I would see coming out of this committee are things that we haven't put in this, like shared parking. What are we going to do there? Some of those things are enforcement, or I don't think we do too much enforcement on parking. Those are the things, I think the new things, I think the board would be interested in seeing. Like I said, these things, just pull them out and say, we would like you to put that higher up on the priority list. And then
I
the
think
rest
that's a
of-
good suggestion, Frank. Always when you make suggestions, you should set priorities. And I think that that's an excellent recommendation. So in the minutes, I think we ought to say that we make suggestions and we also offer some scale of priority.
And the strategic list can actually be a living, working document.
Yep.
Everything out of here related to parking, and then we can start prioritizing it. And then, as Frank said, if things that we don't have in there that we feel we need, add it to it. And then we can just keep cleaning up that list and either working forward or pulling it off. And then we can have a really focused approach to those things that we feel need to be done to achieve our goal.
Excellent point. I think as long as everyone realizes that this task of what we've been given is a living document, we're only going to be able to start the process, and then it'll be additive as we go through it. We'll learn more about what some of the priorities are, some of the issues. So don't expect the document that we submit initially to the township to be the end of it, and then we stop discussion. It's going to have to continue. So I think that was an excellent comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Yeah.
Okay. That answered my question, Amy. And I think that document that you're going to prepare is something now that we can put in our notebooks and start to keep our eyes on it as we go through meetings. And it gives us a little bit of a framework to eventually do a workshop to integrate some of these ideas in a group fashion. Hopefully we can do that soon, given all our COVID advice we get that changes every 36 seconds. So anyhow, and that really is, I think, a key component is that we get together in a room and really exchange ideas and let that, because we learn off of each other's comments. It's much easier to do that in a room than it is on Zoom. Hopefully we can do it. So, anyone else? We seem to be running down on our agenda. Kenny, you're so quiet. I'm worrying about you. You okay? You're breathing and everything's okay?
Don't worry about me, Bob. I'm here. I'm paying
Okay.
attention.
You're not doing any scrupulous activities, are you?
Not that I want to make known to the group. No.
I haven't heard that word in a long time. You used it on a thing to me. It was interesting.
I think I used the word shenanigans, not
Shenanigans, maybe it was. Yeah. It's a great word. Okay, well, we're kind of down to the takeaway elements. Unless someone has some other topics at this meeting that they would like to bring up. We're not trying to rush this, but trying to stay focused on where we're headed. Anyone have any thing that we may have missed so far in our meeting? Okay.
I just had a quick question, Bob. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't know if I missed this or not, but did we say that we were going to have an open forum where people could come in? I know, Amy, you talked about that before, right? To do.
That's what I called a workshop, yes.
Do the mapping, is that, okay, so that's the workshop that's going to be happening then?
Well, we hope so.
Yeah.
It depends on the condition of the COVID regulations.
Okay.
And
That's on the wording. Okay.
I don't think we should put it off. If we have to do it another way, we'll do it certainly. But the important thing is to get together as a group and put this list up and really have some great dialogue. We might have 2 or 3 hours of this where we can plan to do it. I know weekends are very precious to some people, but it's winter right now. And so doing anything outside is minimal. So that it would be the best time to be able to do it if we could, while the weather's not so good.
Bob, one of the, in the folder are our notebooks, as you're saying, is we're collecting stuff that we're going to work through and consider. Is it possible, Mark, that we can do a small version of the map you showed us last time that really set the tone for who's conforming and who's not conforming? Because that certainly made it, in my mind, a more serious, process, but that's my opinion. So
That's a good point. That was a very, very interesting map. It's huge. I don't know how you condense it and make any sense out of it, but
I can certainly provide an 11 by 17 or even 2 11 by 17s if it's too hard to put on one. I can always provide 2. You can put them
East
side by
and west.
side and
yeah.
it should work.
Well, you cut down what you don't think is worthwhile. You know, that was the outer edges were not necessary because everybody was in compliance. But it's up to you.
That's a good suggestion. That's a good document.
Yeah, another.
I mean, when you folded that out on the table, it spoke a lot about existing conditions, conformity and non-conformity, and open space. So it was a great document. Just an aerial. Okay. Let's set up some takeaways for the next meeting, given what we've talked about tonight. Amy, would you help
Yeah.
start this conversation?
So I'll go to the next meeting first, then I'll go to the takeaways that I jotted down from this meeting, if that works.
Okay.
We've been, and Mark's been doing a lot of the research. I went to some of these places over the holidays, but we've
Oh,
been
yeah.
looking at parking regulations in similar communities that have a historic component to it, have a small downtown to it, like Bollesburg. So we've been doing research from Doylestown Borough, Bucks County, Lidditz Borough, Lancaster County, Kennett Square Borough, Chester County, New Hope Borough, Bucks County, Yardley
Wow.
Borough, Bucks County, Milford Borough, Wayne County, Warwick Township, Chester County, which has a historic village, St. Peter's Village in it, and Bellefonte Borough, Center County. So next month, we would like to kind of focus on our research and kind of explain to you what we found, because one of the things we might find in looking at this is that there might be another way to crack our nut here in Bollesburg based on stuff that we've heard elsewhere. If you have other communities that you think, and a lot of these came from Tracy and other people on the committee, which was a great suggestion, but if you have other suggestions of communities, Pennsylvania is helpful because we would all have the same planning regulations, but if you have other communities you want us to look at, let us know, but we'll put together that comprehensive information for you for next month so that we can then discuss this and spend some time
That's
discussing.
excellent.
And
Good.
then the takeaways that I have listed from today's meeting, the committee would like a copy of the official map, and I believe I heard some interest in perhaps having some feedback on that draft map. We're in the process of working on redoing that. Putting together a list of the recommendations from the small area plan and providing them to the committee. The committee will have a workshop to prioritize those recommendations, and then taking those recommendations, creating a list of priorities and kind of using that as your base document, your living, breathing document as you move forward with making your own recommendations. The shared parking discussion, inviting the fire company and the churches to the March meeting, possibly to sit down and have a discussion about shared parking and the possibility of using their parking lots. And then the asking for a small version of the non-conforming conforming uses map that we had at last month's meeting for you guys to have. Did I miss anything?
Well, that's pretty robust. I like it. We'll see how far we can go with it. No, that's great. You know, looking ahead, and I'm not sure how far ahead is, but we're going to need someone with some writing skills to assist in developing this document that we're going to submit to township. I'm used to doing some of those things in my profession, but I think that we probably have people on our committee that have a better sense of writing and getting to the point without having too much information that's not essential. So keep in mind who that person might be or railroaded into that position. So in future, we'll have to have some assistance, and maybe it's a small committee or maybe it's a couple individuals. So
And I'll
keep
just,
that in mind, because we want the presentation to be explicit, to the point, and there, period. So
I'll just chime in that when we did this small area plan, that plan was written entirely by the steering committee. They had broken off into small groups and they had each focused on a different node, a different area in the small area plan. And then
that's what we might do.
yeah, and then I actually have my bachelor's degree in journalism and I used to edit a magazine, so in my professional career. So I took the document, and the only thing I did was made sure that it read with one voice. I didn't change any of the intent, but made sure that it read like one.
Well, that's
voice.
essential. That's essential.
Yeah, so
I think
we
we've
can-
all done theses and papers that are of importance that you really want to get to the point and don't belabor it, but make it a strong point. And that might be very helpful, Amy. I don't know, you have a lot on your plate, but
I like editing.
yeah, well, good.
The
Hey, Bob,
writing part of
Bob,
it
yeah.
worked
Well,
out
who's not here
well with
tonight?
the plan.
Who's not here tonight? That's who we ought to look at for this. Who's not here?
Who's that?
Who's not here tonight? That's who we vote in for that.
Oh, I think Kenny, he's just sitting there so quiet. I worry about it, just worried about him. Okay, good. I think we've had a very good meeting. I think we accomplished, Mark, thank you for the overview. It gave us a path, gave us a refreshment of what's already been done that we need to hear. And I think we accomplished what we need to. Please read the minutes. We will distribute the minutes to everyone on our committee so that they have the opportunity to either see it or read it. It's essential that you try to do that before the meeting so that, we're not rehashing things that have already been discussed. So I thank you all for participating in this cold weather. I hope you had a safe, relaxing New Year's. It was safe and was relaxing on our end, but boy, Monday morning or Tuesday morning, it's like back to work, and it was a sledgehammer over my head. So hope everyone's in good health and safe, and we'll see you at the next meeting in February.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.